Hello and welcome back to the Jolly Ranchers YouTube channel. This week we are doing a basic enemy AI, a boss battle, a unique encounter. I think Fungus is pretty perfect for this. You could make anything from a basic enemy encounter from something like Zelda or Binding of Isaac, which are masterpieces, or something like Dark Souls. They're unique boss fights I think Fungus is perfect for because it's harder to make prefabs from flowcharts in Fungus, which is something that I think could be added to Fungus in the future. Anyway, I hope you enjoy its basic boss fight made with Unity's animator and some fun Fungus physics commands, some prerequisites for doing this tutorial, maybe watching the Angry Birds video and the custom commands video that came before this one. And if you don't have Fungus installed yet, check out the link in the description below to watch my video on how to install Fungus into Unity. So without further ado, enjoy! Okay, here's the sort of Angry Birds clone we did in a previous video. The only thing that's different is that when you click far away, it goes faster, and when you click closer, it goes slower, which is the same as Angry Birds, but backwards. You know, this time we're clicking in the direction we want the ball to go, except instead of the slingshot reverse. And today we're going to do a boss fight with just such a basic thing as this as our player character. So let me knock down these bricks so we can access the boss fight. And here's the boss. Here's the boss's health bar and the players. As you can see, the boss is trying to kill me. And when I hit the boss, the health bar goes down. When I hit it with a smaller speed, it does less damage. So it can calculate the relative velocity of the player and does that much damage, which I think is pretty cool. And when I get within a certain range of the boss, it tries to attack me. When there are sound effects, usually I couldn't get the game sound to capture today. I didn't think it mattered that much, so you're not missing out on much. And eventually, you know, when one of us reaches 0 health, something occurs, an event occurs. Just basic boss fight type stuff, and I think this is what Fungus is kind of perfect for. See, the boss disappears. As you can see, it was attacking me while it disappeared. And then, you know, the game would go on. So this is just a basic, like a very basic boss fight that you can do with Fungus pretty easily. So let's begin. So on our ball flowchart, the things that hold the information about our player character, the ball, I added a float called ball health, and I set it as 100 by default. Then I made a canvas called health sliders, which you can do by clicking the plus button, going to UI, and selecting canvas. And canvas displays things. Let me just turn on this game object with the little check button over here so we can see it. So a canvas just holds UI that will be displayed over the screen wherever the camera is. These are the settings I put on my canvas. Just take note. It scales with screen size, and if it's world space, the sliders will, you know, only be in a particular spot in the world. It won't follow your camera. So, something to know about canvases. You can also right-click, go to UI, and I chose slider. I made 2 of them. This one's the enemy slider. And I set the maximum value to 1,000, which is how much health the enemy has. And on the player slider, I set the max value to 100. And you remember earlier that we said the ball health to 100. So that's how it does it. I set the direction to go from left to right. As you can see, here's the value slider. And when we drag it up and down, the slider fills and unfills. So that is how you do that. And you can resize the various bits and baubles to be shaped how you want. You can change the art in here. In these images, you can drag in whatever image you want, like the face of Watson. But I would not recommend that. So that's how you would set up the just basic sliders, and we're going to leave them there for now, and we'll handle them from inside the flowcharts. So I'm just going to turn this back off, deactivate. So now let's go to the boss itself. I'm going to activate it as well. We should check out what is on our boss. So on the object itself, you can see we have a flowchart childed underneath the building chunk, but we'll get to that. On the building chunk itself is its sprite, which is this square that I've stretched out. You know, you can stretch it out by using this rect tool up here and stretching it out like so. I put a box collider on there, which should just be, I know there are a lot of box colliders on here, but this one is just the shape of the rectangle itself. If you just press reset, it should shape itself to the size of the sprite, which it just did. So that's the easy way to do that. I put a flowchart component on it by going down here, add component, typing in flowchart. If you've downloaded Fungus from the link in my description, then you should have flowchart right here. And you can click that. Here's an AI behavior script that I tested out. It is actually not necessary. As you can see, it's unchecked. And then I set some basic animations. I just had, when the block is moving, having it pulse like this. So this is great for any animation you want to do. I just clicked the record button, and when it was here, I changed the scale to the number I wanted. And when it was here, I changed the scale to the other number I wanted. And really, I just did it by dragging it out. You can see with my crazy numbers, I dragged it out, and it creates a new keyframe right there. And so it remembers what size you want it to be. So now it should, whoa, that's too much. As you can see, this is the perfect animation. Perfect. Okay, so this is something key, and where you will want to right-click on this and create an empty game object, and it should create a child underneath this parent game object. If not, you can just drag it under like so, and it will child it. And when you have a childed object underneath something you're animating, you can include it as part of the animation, which is very helpful for something like this. So when the block attacks, that's when we want touching the block to hurt the player. We don't want touching the block to hurt the player all the time, because touching it is how we attack it. And we don't want to get hurt every time we attack. So I created a basic animation with this same tool. I pressed the record button, and I changed the rotation of the block over time to -45, 0. So it's winding up to show you, oh, it's about to attack. 0, and then 90, 180, 270, 360, and then back to 0. 360 and 0 are the same. And so this is the attack. Whee! Whee! And as you can see here, I made the hurt box appear right after it finished winding up. And I seem to have turned it off right here. But I think I should turn it off once it finishes its attack and straightens up again. So I should probably turn off the hurt box right here again. So I can just click on the hurt box while it's recording and check it off. You can see it created a keyframe there, and I'll stop recording. So now the boss won't hurt me after it's already done with the attack. It'll only hurt me during the spinning motion. That's a key thing to know about this animation. So, the hurt box itself, the empty game object that you have created and has nothing on it, will have a box collider on it. It could just be a trigger, but as you can see here, I didn't make it a trigger. That's fine. So I added 2 box colliders on it. One right here. I don't know if you can see this green box right here. And I added one on the end because where it's spinning, it is going to hurt you, was my logic. And I added a flowchart component to this, once again, by going to add component, typing in FL and adding flowchart. So now let's look at the flowcharts that govern our boss. The most important one is in an update block, which I right-click, add block, and then I went to execute event here on event on my new block, went to monobehavior update. So that creates an update block that will run the thing inside the block every frame of the game, which is as fast as the game can possibly check to do something. So I put my custom move towards command, which I covered in the last video. I made this command to make one object move a game object to a specified position over time. Place in update block. So that's what I've done. I put in the object that I want to move, which is the building chunk 5, which I should probably rename basic enemy. So it moves the basic enemy towards the ball sprite. I did a stupid and I made the ball sprite separate from the ball flowchart. I should have just had them be the same. But if you have a separate flowchart that has information about your ball sprite and the collider and the rigid body of your angry bird, your angry ball, then you'll want to put that in the move towards, because you want it to move towards that sprite. And then you can change the speed that you want it to travel at. It's just a random number. It can be anything. 2 was what I chose for a bit of a challenge. Maybe I'll have it go faster, because it was really easy to beat. Now it'll go crazy fast. Okay, so I have a new block, created it just the same way, right-click, add block, or you can go up here to the plus button, and I went to execute on event up here, monobehavior collision 2D. You do not want to use the tag filter. I could not get it to work whatsoever, so just don't worry about it. You're going to want it to fire when anything enters its collision area. You want it to fire on enter when the ball enters the collider on the basic enemy. So when it hits the box collider that is not a trigger, this block will fire. And you're going to need a collision variable to hold the information of what has collided with this basic enemy. Once again, from earlier videos, I have a collision 2D variable on my ball. It's public and it's called ball collision. Back to the basic enemy. So you'll want to put in that variable, like so. Okay, so first thing, we're going to do a collision 2D command to understand what is hitting our basic enemy. And we are going to save that information in a collider variable that is on our basic enemy. You can go here and click other/collider to create a new collider variable. And if our variable collider is equal to the data inside the ball collision object, so basically if we're colliding with the ball, then the stuff underneath in this section will happen until this end command. Everything in here will occur if the ball has hit the enemy. So first we'll play a sound effect with a play sound command. You can access commands from this plus button. If you click twice, it will order itself in nice lists. So play sound. Then I did a collision 2D command, and this time I asked it to get the relative velocity of the ball so that we can tell how hard the ball is hitting the enemy, which I think is very neat and a neat way to take away the health of the enemy. So I saved that in a vector2 variable, as you can see here. You create that the same way as you do other variables. Double click other vector2. So that's where we're going to save the information about how hard, what the relative velocity of the ball is when it hits. So we are doing 2 vector2 commands because we want to get the x velocity and the y velocity into their own variables. I made 2 float variables, one named y, one named x, because we want to find the absolute value of these variables, because otherwise when we subtract the relative velocity from the health, the enemy's health, which you can see here, I've added a variable called enemy health and set it at 1000. which is quite a lot, and the battle takes a long time. And it's a float variable, easy peasy right there. So we want to find the absolute value, because if the velocity is negative, if we're approaching it from the right side and going left, then the velocity of the ball will be negative. So we want to just make sure this is a positive number so that when we subtract it, the enemy's health always goes down and we're not adding enemy health. And then we set the slider value. I'll just show you where to find all these commands. UI, set slider value. That's where you find that one. Property vector2 is where you get the vector2 command. Collision 2D is also in property. And absolute value should be in math. So that's where you find those commands in that list. Fade sprite, this is where I change it to a red color by turning it red instantly in 0 seconds, and then slowly turning it back to white over 1 second. And I don't wait for it to finish, so that this block can run again immediately as soon as we hit the enemy again. As you can see here, I set a contingency. If enemy health is less than 0, then it's dead. And so I play a sound effect. I set this animation cue so the enemy does not attack you. So I set that to false so that it can't attack you as it's dying. And then I fade it to green over 5 seconds and invisible. The alpha is 0. And then I set it to false. So you can just put any dying effects inside of this clause. And anything after this, you don't need to do. I was just messing about. That is the basics of the fight. And here, you'll notice this animation bool. We have 2 trigger 2D commands, which deal with the animation, the attacking animation of the enemy. So you can see we're setting an animator bool, a Boolean variable on the animator, to something, and that is controlled within the animator window, which you can make a new animator window by going to Window, Animation, Animator. So you can see I added a parameter onto my animator. Your animation blocks should appear here by default if you've created them, and if you click on the basic enemy, you should be able to see your animations that you put on it. So we have our block walking and block attacks, and we have our is near parameter, which you can create by clicking this plus button, clicking bool. So we just want to know if the player is near or not, which we do by putting this box collider trigger on our building chunk. You can see here this wider box collider, the trigger box collider, is how it will tell when the player is close. And you can, change that area to say when the block is going to start attacking, when the player gets close to it. So you can right-click on each of your animations and make a transition. This handy arrow will come out, and you can attach it to any of these blocks just by clicking. As you can see, I've already have transitions, so I'm not going to do that. But you want transitions there and back. And this transition says that when the block is just walking around, if the player is near, if is near is true, then we'll go to the block attacks animation. And if the player is not near, if is near is false, then we'll go back to walking. Very simple. Things you might want to note here is exit time. I didn't want any time between the animations, so I clicked that off and make sure the transition duration is 0 for both of those. Okay, so back to the basic enemy, and this is the last thing. This is a new block with the trigger 2D execute on event, and this one executes when the block enters the trigger field, and you set basic enemy is near to true. It's just a basic animation command under the animation section, set anim bool. And a trigger 2D on exit, and you set the value off for is near. So it's very simple. And just in case, let's look at the animations themselves. So my block attacks animation loops, and my block walking animation loops. So that's it for the basic enemy encounter. I think Fungus is great for this kind of, if you have any unique situation in your game, you can just throw together a quick flow chart, set up a basic enemy with basic interactions, and it's basic. Okay, that was that video. In the next coming months, I hope to do sort of a top-down RPG made entirely with Fungus, something like Pokemon or, Final Fantasy or, classic JRPG type stuff. Zelda even, but with turn-based combat and an inventory, and I hope to make it entirely with Fungus this time. So if you're pumped about that kind of thing, get hype, leave comments, like the videos, tell your friends who you might want to make games with in the future, and subscribe to the channel if I didn't say that already. And I'm making a game called Kid Detective, which is a murder mystery RPG based on Game Maker's Toolkit's video on what makes a good detective game. So it's on Steam. It's got a Steam page. Please wishlist it if you can to help me out. And that's it for this week. So until next time, stay jolly.